those are the two biggies, right? This fear of coercion of vulnerable people, religion as a construct. I would say the other opposition is just, you know, I'm on a podcast, right? So I can say what I'm going to
Absolutely.
say a little more fearlessly. I think some of it's just straight out, people just lack the courage.
I'm Daniel Zimbaroff, and this is the Dine with Dignity podcast, the first one, and I'm very excited to bring on my guest in a moment, Michelle Witte from the Final Exit Network. Michelle and I have known each other now for, well, I guess the better part of a year, and this podcast really came about
Mhm.
from a conversation she and I had early on. So we'll get into that in just a moment. And I would like to introduce Michelle. So, Michelle Witte, welcome to the inaugural Dine with Dignity podcast.
Thank
Michelle, where are
you so
you?
much, Dan. I feel very privileged to be the first.
Well, I feel privileged having you here with us. Where are you coming from today?
So I live in Woodbury, Minnesota, a suburb of St. Paul. So I'm in the middle of the country here.
Nice, nice. Um, well, why don't you give us a little bit of background of who you are and how you got into the end of life choice arena, if you will?
Yeah. It's a special club, right? It's an odd club. You don't think about joining, but anyone who has been a part of a bad death, as I was, my mother was dying of Parkinson's. Something we share, Dan, of having parents with Parkinson's, which is as you know, is not really labeled as a terminal disease, but it has a lot of bad things that can happen at the end, a lot of variable things. So, and I had done hospice care here with my mom. And, at the same time, I was also advocating with Compassionate Choices here in Minnesota for medical aid in dying in Minnesota. And I just am amazed when I look back at all the things I just had no idea about, right? You unfortunately, or like many things, right? You don't think about things until you're kind of forced to, which is also why these conversations are so important because, like all the choices we have in life, we don't have a choice about death. We are all headed the same direction. And I realized how powerful it was to know more. I again had my mom here in my home with did home hospice with Parkinson's, but her life was a living hell every day. She would just ask me every day, "When will this end? When will this end?" And said what a lot of people say: "Just take me out and shoot me. Just take me out and shoot me." And I'm like, Mom, that's not an option. But when I share that story, so many people are like, "Oh yeah, I know, I've seen that." Because people are just stuck and in a system where we have great health care here in Minnesota. I was in home hospice, people all around me, but no one could give us an answer or a way to cure her suffering because it wasn't traditional medical model, which so many people do live outside of at the end of their life. And so somebody happened to just, again, share with me this flyer from Compassionate Choices at the time, which was a concept called VSED, right? Voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, which on the face of it is starving yourself to death, right? Which is how my mom took it when I was like, well, we can help you, but we'll have to stop eating and drinking. And that, of course, was frightening to her, to my dad, to me. But I'll go to the beginning of the story with the end of the story in mind, that the people who really are the brave ones and the heroes in this space are the people who make those choices. I didn't realize till getting into this job how brave my mom really was at the time for making that choice. As we'll talk about, these are not easy choices, but we had one and we figured it out. And definitely it was better than the agony she was going through. So that opened a window to me to see the importance of learning more. I had no idea at the time that she would have never qualified for medical aid in dying, even if we had passed it here in Minnesota. So when this opportunity came along to be their new executive director, I was very intrigued, and I'm just thrilled that I jumped in because there's so much I've learned, so much we have to teach people, and it's a very powerful and meaningful space to be in.
Thank you for sharing your story and your mother's story. Just a quick question there. So, other than that flyer, did you have any other assistance? Did you rely on any other organizations at the time to have more information?
I didn't. That's what was it was very odd. Again, especially looking back, the hospice worker, I said, well, I think this is our option. And, a lot of people think, hospice in your home, they pop in once a week, right? So there's not a lot of connection. You can get any drug you wanted. I mean, I had a house full of pills that weren't helping her. So they didn't object to it. And I didn't really know anything about the whole space of, end of life. Did I have other choices? So I really was alone. That was, something I remain sad about, but also more angry, about like, wait a minute, when did healthcare just sort of end here? We were not done with this journey, and I was really angry with the physicians. I remember sort of snapping at one at one point. Where I'm like, how is this honoring your oath? Do no harm, because my mom is being harmed every minute of every day, and we need an option. So I was really upset, about not have like, wait, what? You're just letting me here all by myself, and that is what it was. It was a very lonely place, confusing, but the only, at the same time hopeful in that I couldn't, to watch her go through another day of the agony she had was far worse. So again, glad we had an option, and shocked at how poorly equipped our healthcare world seems to be in this conversation.
Well, that sounds like a good segue then to the Final Exit Network, the organization that now you're a part of, in fact, the executive director, which I think you've had that position for a little less than a year. Explain a little bit what the organization is and what it does and what it doesn't do.
Yeah, thank you. So, Final Exit Network, I mean, our mission is very simple, is to educate and support those who want choice in dying. And we'll get more into some of those, what all those words mean, because they all have a meaning. But essentially, we have three main programs. The first one is the education, educating people on end of life options. Final Network offers a wide range of educational resources, workshops. Our website is very vibrant with information, stories. We provide a lot of resources to healthcare providers themselves, end of life doulas, and hospice workers, and all these folks working at end of life organizations, to try to educate them on the choices. There are choices. And there's including, you can keep going, right? We get to the end of life, you can do clinical trials. There's lots of things you can do. We say so often, it's if you plan for a good death, you can have a better life, right? To have those options, not have that worry. But the four big areas then that we educate on and then also provide personal support are the sort of main options that really, again, are all grounded in promoting peace, dignity, and personal autonomy at end of life. And so there's sort of four big choices that people can make here in the United States, within the legal boundaries, which we'll talk about. I should say there's really a fifth, but the fifth is, you can deny treatment, right? At any point, someone can say, I'm just done, right? I'm not going to be treated anymore. And in a lot of ways, that's what my mother said. I mean, I can't swallow these pills. I can't do this. I'm not getting any better. That was kind of the first state. And then what we have, of course, is medical aid in dying, or MAID, which a lot of people may or may not know. It's shocking to me when we talk later about how many people don't realize in the states where it's legal. And medical aid in dying is now legal in 13 states, plus the District of Columbia, so 14 areas where there's basically what MAID does, again, is make it legal for physicians to prescribe a medication, but you still have to ingest it, or either orally or rectally yourself, in order to hasten your death or end your life due to some, medical, intractable suffering. For MAID, though, every state has different requirements, but generally you have to have a 6 month window that it is known that you are on your way toward death in that 6 months. So there's a lot of restrictions. We'll talk about that, but it's a great option, right? In the states that have it for people for whom the narrow group of people that qualify. The second big area in the space we educate again and try to provide support for is voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, which is a fancy way of not eating and drinking, right? Or called VSED, which is what my mom used. And basically, why it's sort of a method is because it is you can you can eat very, very little for a very, very long time. In order to hasten your death, however, you do have to really not eat anything and not drink anything. And in my mom's case, she was already very frail at about 108 pounds or so. She didn't eat for 11 days, and she didn't drink for 5 days before she died. So you really need some drugs and support. I mean, it's unpleasant if you tried to do it without any support. We really encourage people to, contract with an end of life doula or someone who understands this, because it really shouldn't be done on your own. I mean, you do have to do it on your own, but the help would have been really, really helpful to me. The third way is obviously the way, Dan, your family chose, is assisted dying in Switzerland. Switzerland has one of the most open programs in the world for people to travel to in order to have a peaceful end of life. Many great success stories of how they work with people, and your book is so brave and wonderful to share that story of you with your father. But that is very popular for us. We do have a whole web page of information, a magazine, a webinar we did recently. Learning about Switzerland is more and more becoming more common as people think about it. And then lastly, we have our own, what we call our exit guide program. And our exit guide program really are for people, especially who really just don't qualify for MAID. They maybe can't go to Switzerland. There's lots of things, but it's people still have to meet our medical criteria. And we offer an exit guide. Our exit guide program is free of charge for anyone in the United States, and we have trained guides that support our clients in responsible, as we might say, self-deliverance or end-of-life choice. Applicants, still need to be mentally competent, as all people in the United States do, to make these choices, and physically able to perform all the necessary actions themselves. And that's sort of a theme of the story here, right? That you have to be able to do in the United States. Some of the differentiations is you've got to do all these actions yourself to stay within the legal limits, even if it's medical aid in dying. So we really pride ourselves on, education isn't just information sharing. Here's a book, here's a pamphlet, and like in my case, here's a flyer. Well, a flyer on its own, if I had had a compassionate presence, someone to ask questions, someone to guide me through, that would have been amazing. So I love our volunteers. Our exit guides are all trained and very professionalized in their training to help people at, the most vulnerable time of their life, making this decision to end their life on their own terms peacefully. So that's the nutshell of who FEN is.
Yeah, that's a lot. So if I understand it, in FEN, you don't have any practitioners. You're not doing anything active. I guess the most active would be the guides that help people assimilate the information. But the people, the clients, if you will, or the people that are contacting FEN can be pretty much anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country. What the demographic, if you will, of the people that rely on FEN?
Right. So they need to be in the country. They have to be in the United States. And they, like all the programs that you see here, people do need to have, their own mental competency, to be able to say, I'm doing this of my own free will. This is my choice. I understand. And they need to also have family support, right? And that's probably when we talk about, if we talk later about what some of the opposition and the challenges are, is bringing your family along, because these are decisions that, affect everyone. Um, and so we do have our volunteers are very much, it really is the education and support are for all the things that are legal in our world. We have freedom of speech, and it is free, it is legal to end your own life. A lot of people just don't realize that. I mean, there was in the recent past, the act of ending your own life was illegal, but it is legal to end your own life in every state. It is legal to be in the room with someone who took their life. It is not legal to assist. This is the area we live in, and Fen lives in more than others sometimes, because what does it mean to assist? Is it assisting someone to educate them? Technically, no. The First Amendment is like, hey, we have a right, people have a right to read and learn, and we have a right to teach and talk and instruct. But we have to be very, very deliberate in our work and in working with families that in no way can they provide physical means or assistance. People have to do everything on their own. And that, in the one way, that's how you should want it. People need to be able to do that on their own. The flip side to that is really people with disabilities really get discriminated against, right? Because there's a lot of these things that are hard to do on your own if you have a variety of disabilities. So there's a lot to talk about there, right? But the one differentiation I'd like to make, Dan, is, I think we talk about assisted suicide, and that's what all the laws fall in legally around assisting suicide. It is illegal to assist in a suicide, and those laws are different state to state. But the thing I really want to point out is the real difference, that technically it's true, if you end your life, you are in legal parlance committing suicide. But think about what a suicide looks like. I mean, we very much, and right at the top of our webpage, we have a suicide prevention hotline. Suicides in the normal way we see them, it is a rash decision made hastily, made alone, often violent and traumatic to others. It's very different. Choice in dying is very different. It's making a deliberate choice in consultation with your family, in a peaceful way that doesn't provide this end of life trauma that, unfortunately, so many people do make violent choices because they don't know what other choices they are. So I like to really point out that differentiation in how we see and how choice in dying differs from suicide as we define it legally.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I was going to raise that as well. For me, I think the difference is suicide is usually done in the dark, and assisted dying with dignity, end of choice, is usually done in the light, in the open, with support of family members. You definitely touched upon
Exactly.
it, but with respect to the legal aspects, and each state does vary slightly in the states that do have the laws that allow for some type of death with dignity, that assistance. And I know that when I'm out there talking with folks, many times people are concerned that, that they're going to cross the line and be liable in some way, even if they provide information to a loved one or a friend. Can you speak I know you're not a lawyer. I'm not asking you for legal advice.
Right. So a couple things. First of all, medical aid in dying really is, again, officially where state legislatures, approve and say, listen, they create a space where it's legal to prescribe medication and ingest that medication. And there's a legal protection there that is great. But of course, it's very limited, as we talked about. VSED sort of has a legal protection in that it is simply viewed as not refusing treatment. I'm refusing to eat and drink. The irony is, however, obviously assistance is happening. I mean, it's really hard to die on your own without any medical support. But it's kind of has this legal space because it's not seen as suicide. So other means outside of that, and where Fen works in and stuff, if people want to use other methods, there's just more concern sometimes about those. They don't have a traditional legal function. But what is legal, and that's why we're so clear. I mean, the limits are frustrating in the sense that, unfortunately, anyone can take violent means. Then really, we're just trying to get people to replace that moment of desperation and violent means that people could take into something that is much more peaceful and in control, like we said. So I think that though where the assisting comes in, that technically telling people, hey, there's Final Exit Network. And for Final Exit Network, we've been around 22 years and, never, we live in a space where law enforcement wonders, people wonder because they don't have a space or a language sometimes for different methods that people take their life. But again, we all free speech, it's okay. And we have to remind people that it's okay to tell people about things, to provide resources, to let them know what their options are. Assisting is usually the physical means. You can't be involved in buying equipment for somebody who ends their life, or putting it together, or helping them access it. Even in MAID, even though it has this big legal space, was surprising to me, people still have to physically ingest it themselves. You can't help someone if, I broke my hand, if I'd have to find a way to do that myself. So those are kind of the big parameters, assisting. Now, of course, we live in a world where free speech is sometimes compromised, and that's another whole show, right?
Exactly.
Of that. But that's the basic things, and it's a reminder that we do have, these are options you do have and can and should consider.
Well, it's a great service that Fen is providing. Just wonderful assistance. I'd like to talk a little bit about the opposition. I'm sure Fen and maybe yourself out there as executive director receives its share of opposition. How does that come about, and do you have any thoughts as how to counter that misinformation or disinformation or opposition?
Yeah, oh, it's a tough one. When I was advocating for medical aid in dying here in Minnesota, with Compassionate Choices, we had our yellow shirts on, and then on the other side of the conference room were people in their red shirts, right? And I was like, wait, I normally always advocate with these people in the red shirts. What's going on here? What are we not seeing? And so, I think like many things, and it's lack of information is, lack that I feel is out there. But in my case, like here in Minnesota, unfortunately, the people who really oppose it, well, first of all, the easiest one is religion. You know, Technically, formal religion believes that taking your life is a sin, even though I often said, it was easier for me to say, my God did not want to watch my mother suffer like that. I always said, if you've taken a pill or any kind of medication, you've already subverted God's will, if that's what you believe. I don't understand why God's will works. And then at the end, what God wants people to suffer like that. But that's me. But religion, formal religion, is certainly probably the biggest detraction. But here in Minnesota, what was interesting was several people had really mobilized, especially the disability community, which was really sad and hard to see, because the fear there is the fear of coercion, the feel that if you have a legal space where people can take their own life, a lot of people do take their own life because they are afraid of loss of personal autonomy. They're afraid of the burden they might do on others. And those are things that, like, people with severe disabilities are like, hey, I have to live that way every day. I want my life to be valid too. And that's a real fear. I get that. I don't, want to dismiss that. Because we do want to have a healthcare system that acknowledges and supports and provides assistance to people with disabilities. we also want all people to have those choices at the end of life, no matter what. And really, the way you see medical aid in dying, or across the world, right? Whether it's euthanasia based, like where you can get an injection, or anywhere in the world, you still have to do it. You have to really claim it yourself. So there's those who fear, though, that there's a slippery slope, that if there's a legal space, people might start to intentionally take other people's lives. And I understand. I mean, I think the fear. You look at our world, and it's not. You can, I think if you're in a vulnerable space, I could understand that fear. I think, though, as we've seen how, as across the globe, as death with dignity has rolled out, you just don't see that happening. I mean, the evidence seems to me to be very clear that, this is simply an option for people themselves who want to make that choice. So I think also those are the two biggies, right? This fear of coercion of vulnerable people, religion as a construct. I would say the other opposition is just, I'm on a podcast, right? So I can say what I'm going to
Absolutely.
say a little more fearlessly. I think some of it's just straight out, people just lack the courage to look at this issue. We're dying. We need to say the word. We need to talk about it. And that's been really frustrating for me with the disease associations. With Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and people, the evidence is clear that people, many by millions, face dying in a really awful way. And there's no one solution to that, but let's just talk about it. Like, let's figure this out. You don't get to just drop my mom off at the end of the curb. That's how I felt, right? Because you aren't willing to talk about death. She's going to die. She's in hospice. What are we going to do? So I think in the bigger picture, we've got to have the courage, and organizations, the medical establishment, even in California, Dan, California's had end of life California, talking with them and looking at California, they've had medical aid in dying for almost 10 years now. But mostly none of the palliative care doctors, very few of them will actually even prescribe the medication, even though it's legal. People have to go outside and pay thousands of dollars for a different doctor to write the prescription. And so that's like, what? That's crazy to me. So I think the bigger things and how we deal, I mean, it is mis and disinformation, but the first thing is, okay, we're going to die. We got to have the conversation, right? In our homes, in our families, among our friends, within our wider institutions who care for us. We've got to have the courage to have conversations, even if we don't have good answers, right? Let's just look at, when people come to us and come to FEN, mostly people come to us to go, oh my gosh, I don't know. And we give them all these options, and just knowing you have some options, you have some control you can take, is palliative in and of itself. Even if none of the options are good, at least helping people have their own autonomy to learn and make their own choices, right? That's at the essence of our healthcare system, is giving people their choices. So you don't have to like them all or endorse them all, but to give people nothing is where I get frustrated. And the mis and disinformation out there is to continually challenge those ways of thinking, to say, listen, what are you going to do for my mom? What did you do for my mom? Personalizing it, these stories, the story you told of your father, these are so important, because we have to keep pushing at people to do that. And we do that a lot. Also, we have in our programs, we have something called the Chosen Death Forum, and you'll hear about death cafes across the country. It's
Yep.
basically, there's just people who get together and say, I want to talk about death. Like, what is it? How do I do it? What are my options? People have to do this on the fly outside, because there's nowhere in the healthcare system to have this conversation.
That was
So we have to keep talking about it. We have to be prepared.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest surprises I had when I first started getting into this arena when I attended a conference was hearing that palliative care doctors had some of the strongest opposition to the Die with Dignity laws. Here, I thought that, I mean,
Hmm.
that's their purpose, right? To reduce suffering. But in their minds, and I understand it, they,
Right.
in their professional mind and bias, they want to extend every potential effort, even if it means just extending life for a couple of days, right? They're going to administer the medication and do that. So I was surprised professionally. And then also, as you said, just the fear of more or less the layperson out there. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this and start this podcast was to help break that taboo, talking about
Hmm.
death. We so often compare
Right.
death and it's a negative, it's in the dark, it's something that's squeamish, we don't want to talk about. As you said, it's part of life, right? It's the end of life, but it's still part of life.
Hmm.
And if we want to have, if we lead a good
Hmm.
life, hopefully it leads to a good death. And it's part of the process. If nothing else, it should be talked about and brought out into the
Right.
open and alleviate some of that fear, alleviate some of that anxiety, include that information out there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've found that in my
Right.
limited role, I'm getting out there as well. I'm wondering if
Hmm.
kind of shifting the conversation a little bit to Fen, and do you have any upcoming initiatives or what you're working on in the next year or so now that you've got your feet, I think,
Yeah.
stable?
Right. So we, there's so many possibilities in that space. I mean, right, that because again, I'm just so surprised at how many people don't know and haven't planned. And so, one of the things we still do is trying to help people really get clear with you need to get your forms in action, right? And we're gonna actually we've had a relationship, but we're gonna also kind of reboot and rekindle our relationship with they've kind of changed their name, but it's the U.S. Advanced Care Planning Registry to get people to do their documents. And on the registry, if they're a member of FEN, we pay for that. And then it can have a little card so that the whole family and everyone knows where to find your documents, right? I found that in my mom's case where, you're going between doctors and I'm like, okay, we're in the same system. Why do I have to produce these every time why do you not read these or know, finding the documents, but just completing them, right? Like getting people to have those initial conversations are so important. Step number one. So we want to continue to do that and encourage that kind of dialogue. We also, I'm really, really enjoying meeting all the other choice and dying groups. So the end of life groups that form in states where MAID is legal. They're kind of left, most every state kind of has a nonprofit that's like, okay, now go figure out how to, it's legal, now go help people figure out how to do it. And I see we could have much bigger partnerships there. We have several partnerships there with end of life organizations, especially because so few people qualify. They want to also let, if they don't qualify, a lot of these volunteers who are helping people, like, well, what else can I do? So we try to let them know we're here as an option, let them know they can just call, we'll talk about options. So, and then I think working more intentionally with those groups as well as with hospice providers, with doulas, end of life doulas. A lot of people don't know about end of life doulas, but there's such a critical piece. We really are kind of in that space where people do already understand the concept, working more together so that we can have greater impact. I kind of like to think of the concentric circle model. Let's start where we have, each other's, we get it, and then work together to come out, so we're not a bunch of silos out there. So trying to create those partnerships. We are involved with World Federation of Right to Die Societies. They are really active, across the globe. Love working with that group and really continuing to learn from and share with other nations and the experience they have. And I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is the storytelling importance. On our webpage, there are two videos. The first one is a really good one just talking about our program. But the second one is the story of a client of ours, John, who is about to turn 90 with Alzheimer's, talking with the choice he made. It's why I think I really encourage people to watch that little video right there as you're showing on the right, a client's story, John's story, because it really humanizes. Hey, this was my life. Like, this is my life, right? People are a whole person. They have a whole place they're coming from, and to appreciate their life and why the choices, why they're making the choices they want to. And I think we do a lot with our magazine, and that's kind of why, we met you, because your book is so important and powerful, Dan, because people are really looking for those stories, right? It also helps alleviate the fear people have. So we review books, and we have a quarterly magazine, and because people are like, oh, wow, here's this really cool guy and he did that, I can do that. The stories are important in a space that has a lot of fear and unknown, to see that other people have faced similar stories, similar experiences, and that help them feel the confidence that they can feel, to help themselves or their family members. And as I said before, part of it is just, to me, it's the honoring of the bravery that people have, because the courage in this movement is people just embracing their autonomy and saying, listen, you're not going to, I have this power and you're not going to take it from me. And that's a pretty hard thing to use at the end of your life when you're suffering. And I really would love to magnify that, that I know it's scary, but people are doing it, and you can have the courage to make choices that relieve your suffering. So we're also, like a lot of nonprofits, just trying to kind of stay in the game here, in the sense of it's a tough time, right? Free speech and things like that are being challenged. And so we also have to work a little harder to make sure that we are all staying safe in the laws and the rules the way they are, which we're happy to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about the coordination among the various organizations. I mean, I found that just recently into the space, if you will, and doing my research. You mentioned the World Federation of Right to Die Societies as kind of a global umbrella, if you will, and they have that semi-annual international conference. Various countries hosted each every other year. Wonderful. I was able to attend that when it was actually here in Toronto a couple of years ago. But it seems like, the states, as you said, a lot of it just grassroots are popping up as the laws change. And so many of these states have just adopted legislation just in the last couple of years. So it would be great. I think we've got a lot of room and a lot of runway to work with in coordinating, because it's not just getting that initial law passed. As you said, each of the states, the 13 plus the
Right.
DC, it's still fairly limited. I don't want to, downplay it in the sense it's great there are some rights, but compared to, let's say, well, obviously Switzerland is the most progressive, but here in Canada, it's fairly progressive on the medical assistance and dying aspect of it. But here, we're fighting now for mental health. That's been something that was passed initially in 2022, but it's been kicked down the road in implementation. In fact, now it's in jeopardy, as well as advance requests, which is a big one, being able to have that mental capacity when you can. And so I think there's a lot of room for, on the legislative side, not just expansion of the number of states, but is the rights themselves. So hopefully, in time, we'll be able to coordinate and amass those resources and continue that movement going forward.
Right. And I think, yeah, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about dementia, right? And what Canada is doing, attempting to do, which is, again, a very bold and courageous act. I mean, we're staring at, here in the United States, I think there's about, 7 million or 8 million now of people with Alzheimer's or dementia. And, again, no one wants coercion, right? Let's just, no one wants to, we want people to have that. And we do that's probably the biggest challenge we face with almost all these choices is that people have a window of opportunity. And what that often might mean, sometimes we'll say, and John's story is really good at capturing this, so I really do love for people to watch that, but it's the notion of leaving some life on the table, which you talk about, too, in your book, and people who go to Switzerland that, you it's a hard thing. You feel like, oh, I should fight till the bitter end. And it's like, and when is that end? And I mean, these are not easy decisions, right? So no one pretends that they are. Um, but to be able to say, listen, when these circumstances are present, right? Um, if I get to here, there, or the other place, I really want the opportunity to end my life. That conversation, we just need to be willing to talk about that. And I feel like the flip side of the stories are probably where we need to be told. Because I've been very disappointed how sometimes how the mainstream press covers, especially covers Canada's experience. People will find a few people where they question whether they should have had the right to do it, but they don't cover the literal millions of people who are outside of that, looking passionately for the exit door in pain. I mean, those are the stories we probably need to start emphasizing. These are the people left behind as you all debate, what's legal and not legal. You also have to understand that you are leaving millions of people imperiled with no choice. And so, I sort of feel like one of the reasons, I'm really pleased. I mean, Compassionate Choices works on the legal end. We actually both come out of the same place. Compassionate Choices and Final Exit Network were both born out of the Hemlock Society, which still has a chapter in San Diego. And from that movement, and Compassionate Choices works on the legislative solution, which is great. But I was really excited about coming to Final Exit Network because regardless of what the legal challenges are, I really wanted to be in that place where, like, no matter what happens, you still have your own autonomy to exercise your First Amendment right to do what you want with your own body and your life. It's your life, it's your choice. And owning that space is really hard for people, right? Sometimes it's just not the way but it's like, that's, no one can take that from you ultimately. And you have to own it, and you have to, and you have to be responsible with it, right? You have to learn, you have to know. And that's where Fen sits, which is what I love about it, is helping people understand, number one, build the confidence in them. If you are, you can help your family, you can help your, people understand that they have choices, and then to be supportive when they make them. Because while I found out V said, yay, I was literally all alone at my mom's bedside. And that wasn't okay. So to have people who can, again, not assist, but to
Yep.
be that presence is so, we can all do that. So we need all of us working together. It's hard, I guess, building collaborations. People have a lot of different points of view, but I hope that we will see more collaboration among the end of life groups here in the United States. And I think Canada's story, we look at you and go, wow, I mean, you've made amazing progress, and know that there's lots ahead to talk about and work on.
Exactly. And speaking of what's ahead, so where do you see Fen in 5 years from now, or a little bit further on?
Yeah. Well, my prior job before coming here, I was the executive director of the League of Women Voters for the state of Minnesota. And we were the group formed after the suffragists got women's right to vote in 1920, right? So there's this great Broadway musical that's been going around the country called Suffs the Musical. And there's this great song at the end that I am going to quote for you because it's so perfect. It took 72 years for women to get the right to vote from when it was first declared to when it happened. It was Seneca Falls in 1848, and it took till 1920. But the musical says right off the top, the first thing is, I won't live to see the future that I fight for. Maybe no one gets to reach that perfect day. if the work is never over, then why do you keep marching anyway? And I just love that because that is the spirit of it is, you know, we when it comes to big social change and things that are important, we fight today for those coming up behind us because every right we have in our lives today, Dan, was because somebody fought for us, right? Ahead of
Yep.
us. And so to me, it's just not an option, you know. The song goes on. I love it's like my memory's not the best, but it's like the path will be twisted and risky and slow, but you keep on marching, right? And I'm like, and when they sang the song, I'm like sobbing at the end because I'm like, this applies to anything, right? You may fail or prevail. You may never know. But the reason is our ancestors show us the proof that while progress is not possible or not guaranteed, it does happen when you keep it won't happen without us keeping on marching, doing the work. Change does come. You know, we've seen it, right? I mean, we are getting medical aid and dying. It's a small little window, right? Only my biggest surprise was that out of 30 years, only about 13,000 people across the country have used MAID, which is about 1% a day, you know, where, you know, you've got, you know, 3 million people a year dying. I mean, there's a very narrow window, but it's something. And what Fen does, what V said, and end of life doulas, and all these people are doing, things are progressing, you know, it's just at a pace that sometimes is really difficult, but we keep on marching and keep working toward it. And I think that's the sort of the essence of what our volunteers and carry at Fen that, you know, yeah, I know you're going to keep punching at us, but listen, you know, it's pretty easy for me to say, listen, really, do you really want people to die, suffer at end of life? I mean, if you ask people the ultimate question, which is the one goal we have is should people have, you know, control, be able to have a peaceful death of their own choosing and activate their own autonomy, you know, the majority of people say yes. So we know that the support is there. It's just the usual infrastructure around it that's harder to get to, but we keep on marching, Dan.
Yeah, I think that's an optimistic outlook for the future, which I agree completely. So I think we'll end it here, but my sense is, or I know, that there's much more to be told, and Fen has much more work to do, and wonderful work that you're continuing to do. I really appreciate the time, Michelle. It's been wonderful just chatting with you, getting to know you a little bit more, and providing this opportunity to share what you're doing and what Fen's doing with other people out there. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity and the chance to be a part of your fabulous book, Wingman, telling your beautiful story of your father. It's I appreciate everyone willing to share those stories. So thank you, Dan, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And until next time, thanks, Michelle.